Hello and welcome to today's episode of Creativity and Luxury with Dr. N. I'm your host, Dr. Nameen, and today we embark on a journey into the world of architectural brilliance, exploring how creativity acts as a transformative force in redefining the essence of luxury for today and the future. Imagine a space where luxury goes beyond aesthetic, material elements, becoming an immersive experience that deeply aligns our dreams and emotions. What does it mean to inhabit a space that reflects opulence, but also embodies cutting-edge innovation? We're incredibly honored to welcome Patrick Schumacher, a thought leader in contemporary architecture and a key visionary force behind Zaha Hadid Architects. As a partner and principal at Zaha Hadid Architects, Patrick has redefined how we perceive opulent spaces, transforming them into immersive, innovative environments. In other words, moving beyond traditional luxury to create innovative, fluid, and highly customized spaces. I invite our listeners to join us as we delve into today's remarkable insights. So without further ado, let's dive into this exciting conversation. So Patrick, welcome and thank you for joining me today on today's episode. I would love to start, first of all, with your journey and how you started your route into architecture.
Wow, yeah, it's been a while ago that I started. Actually, got fascinated with architecture as a growing up because my parents were extending the house and there was an architect around, and I thought this was quite interesting. And then I discovered at school, I was in art class, I discovered the work of Mies van der Rohe, and I thought, wow, this looks really otherworldly and beautiful and something promising. I picked up some TV show also on the work of Mies van der Rohe, particularly on his later works in the US and in Berlin. And then I discovered the work of Niemeyer. This is still as a teenager in movies, Brasilia. So all of this appealed to me. And so when I got a bit older, I first had to study philosophy to just get something out of my system or crack that pretense that there is a higher level of comprehension and reflection. So I had to first kind of drill through there and then move to my passion of architecture.
So you wanted to, did I get this right? You wanted to see the philosophy or the bigger meaning behind it, not just as a functional meaning, but the bigger meaning behind
Well,
it.
if you hear about philosophy, there's supposed to be, or there's this kind of challenge that this is a higher level of reflection, a deeper level of thinking, and a more sophisticated approach, fundamental questions. So if somebody is thinking about these, I had to know about it and had to conquer that. And that's when I went to study at university first. Although I didn't necessarily think of this as to become a profession. So I studied a few years of philosophy. I did also mathematics just to test out my brain power, as you like. And then I kind of learned a lot and I got an overview and reached somewhere and then formed also a position, what kind of philosophy I would find, understand where philosophy had reached at that time in the early 80s. And so I kind of understood that. And then I moved on to architecture. But it helped me that I was able to, understand theory. I moved on to my interest developed also into political philosophy, sociology, economics, these kind of social sciences, which are more immediately linked up to what architects should be up to. Because architecture, I think, needs to be understood obviously as a contribution, fundamental contribution to the development of society. And one should kind of basically understand where society is moving and what are the societal conditions and drivers for prosperity and progress, and then see how architecture fits in with that. So I did this while I was studying architecture and became a professional architect and teacher of architecture and writer about methods of and theory of architecture. I kept reading and studying the social sciences as the theory of society to embed the theory of architecture within that. And so my initial kind of formal studies in philosophy, gave me, let's say, empowered me to be very confident about also absorbing these other areas of social philosophy, political philosophy.
Right. So you're actually approaching it from a very holistic view. Philosophically, what architecture serves in terms of society, the impact it has on society, and perhaps also the impact that culture has in reflecting architecture. Um, that's quite, a beautiful way to approach architecture. And I'm wondering, throughout your long career with Zaha Hadid, has there been any pivotal moments that shaped your career or any specific events?
Yes, I mean, first of all, the fact that I discovered Zaha's works, I was still, if second year in studying in Stuttgart, Germany, inspired me. I then soon moved on to London to continue my studies there. And after I was still a student when I joined her studio, and I had met her at a conference at Tate Gallery in London. This was anticipating the opening of the MoMA deconstructivism show. She was a kind of hot ticket already in the student world. We had noticed her, as I said already, as a student in Stuttgart, certainly in London. And then she suddenly became one of 7 protagonists of a new style in architecture called deconstructivism. That was all very exciting. And so I'd love to participate with that. And there were all the other deconstructivists speaking at the Tate conference, and I thought she was kind of more genuine, the work was more compelling, and she wasn't showing off, but sharing what she was working on, and her passion came through. So it was clear to me that if I could choose which of these protagonists I would work with, it by a mile, it was her.
So the journey started for, was it 30 years now?
Yes, I guess. Started in 88, so that's 36 years ago.
36 years. You know, it's quite interesting that you talk about Zaha Hadid as having as a hot ticket in the student world back then, which means a lot, actually. It means that the students aspire to be part of an organization such as that, and I'm just wondering, what was Zaha's leadership style? And also, just extending from that question now, you as a partner in the firm, what's your leadership style with the view of cultivating a creative culture?
Yes, so I think our styles are very different. So that's why we were maybe a good complementary team. What her style is very much driving everybody and having a passion and impatience, if you like, for excellence, for originality. Every project we had to find something new, and it had to be developed to perfection at the same time in one go. So very, very challenging, and a kind of sense of outdoing herself and outdoing everybody else, viscerally felt, and that kind of emanated and charged up everybody. So that energized everybody. And my role was then also to channel that energy and be supportive to the team and guiding the team more with more detailed instructions, if you like, rather than Zaha's kind of general urge, which was she used to sketch a lot and had references and kept pushing and kept rejecting what people were coming up with, and I had to, and that could generate a lot of anxiety and excitement.
I can imagine, yes.
So and also an anxiety in her. So my role was really kind of like a calming pole and somebody who could also convince her that we've reached something and that she should, go with what we've reached because it was great rather than searching. There was a dynamic between us. So it was actually very good because also division of labor with those who actually have to pull through and do it, and those who push. If they're not the same people, then you obviously has more. You get further because the pain of redoing everything and spending another 2 nights if you don't, is sometimes prevents people from finding the next level of the solution. So the pain was necessary, and it's difficult to inflict pain on oneself to that extent. So that's why the way I understand the situation. But she
And
got a
those
lot of
days,
support. I mean, she had not only we had very few people at the beginning. She had hired, she had her assistant, which helped her with many things, and maybe we were 4 employees on top of that. So with her, we were 6 in the first few years. But she had a lot of ex-students who came to help her for free in the evenings and the weekends. So for these competitions, the teams became much bigger after, whatever, 7 o'clock until midnight, and then on the weekends. So people were just loving it, but she couldn't pay or, these characters who needed at that stage in their life, they couldn't live on nothing. I could still do that. I was still a kind of student. I could live on next to nothing. And there's a few others. So that was the dynamic. Some core staff and a lot of passionate help for free.
I wonder what attracted that. That's not very easy to come by,
Well, I
them.
mean, she was incredibly generous, and she was a star, as I said already, because she had won the peak competition. She's won in '83. Then 3 years later, she won a great project on Kudam. She had been invited to do an EBA project in Berlin as well. And there were some shows of her work. I remember I came to London as a student in '87. They just had a show at the ICA, Institute for Contemporary Art, of her works. So it was thrilling and she has these wonderful, detailed and large-scale paintings and models. And so for these friends of hers, ex-students who might have been doing less exciting work where they were hired and to pay for their lives, they get a more interesting outlet for their creativity in the studio. And what we had, at least our works weren't built at this time, but they were published in magazines, they were exhibited in exhibitions, museums, etc., like the Deconstructivism show itself in New York. That was gave a lot of pride to people, and that was driving a kind of sense of being part of that hot ticket and having this exposure and so on and so forth was interesting and motivational. It was exciting. So she was also very charismatic and very demanding, but also incredibly generous and friendly. And the teams together with their ex-students. They were like a big family. A lot of warmth and camaraderie and hanging out together kind of thing.
So there was a culture that was conducive to this kind of exchange of learning. And what about your style now, especially with the youth, the younger people, the Gen Zs, and you know?
Well, I mean, what we've done, so we started to teach in various universities together, which worked very well, similar dynamic, and she had always everybody working together as a team, and I was kind of driving that and helping shaping the outcome. So we did that at Columbia University in 93, Harvard University 94, back to Columbia in 98, but also in between to Chicago. I got an independent professorship as well there in 96. So we had all these studios, and Drew found students. Then in 96, I was also invited by the then chairman or director of the AA to found another studio together with Brad Steele, who was also sometimes been working with us at the studio, but not regularly, not permanently. And this was the design research lab. So we developed, that was also at that point, we had gone through this kind of digital revolution in architecture, and we're using computers now and algorithms. And that was very stimulating for Zaha as well. We can proliferate a more diverse repertoire in the direction she's been formulating pre-digitally. These kind of gradients, very fluid forms, all of that we had done by hand, but now we could do more of it and faster and more intricately. So she loved that. So that's the way we built the team and grow the team, by bringing in the students. So they had a learning curve outside first, acquiring the ideas, the tools. Also, they noticed us and came to us. And then for 15 years, we were teaching together in Vienna from the year 2000 to 2015, or we did about 8 studies at Yale University. So that's where we mushroomed the firm. And then, of course, all these students, they had friends, and there were others. Of course, it's not 100% students we've been hiring, but we've been developing the teams from a kind of graduate level up. I mean, master's degree at the AA was more mature students. This is a post-professional, a postgraduate master studio of 18 months, quite demanding. But also at Vienna, we had the students for 5 or 6 or 7 years, joining at first years and leaving with a diploma. So we could really, and we had 67 students at any time, but across all the years. And that was a fantastic kind of vehicle of developing a culture inside studio where people can cumulatively and over years build up the repertoire and the skills. When they finally joined the firm, they've already been sometimes 6 years a student. Just our student. Just like there's a totally different concept of a master class. That was very productive. So that's the way, and my leadership style hasn't changed. We give, and Zaha also, we allow for a lot of creative exploration to the staff and the teams, and it's always a competitive process where several people come up with possible ideas. We might be sketching something, they might come up with something, then it's 3D modeled, compared, selected, evolved further. It's very different from what I've heard of studios like maybe Frank Gehry's studio or Calatrava studio and others, where only the master, inverted commas, generates ideas and sketches. And in our case, it was not like that.
Right. You mentioned when the computers came in. So that kind of takes me to the next thought, which is, how innovation and technology has kind of revolutionized not just learning, but also delivery. And just to give you a little more background, I mean, this podcast specifically addresses creativity and how it meets luxury, or the cultivation of creativity in creating luxury. And the role of innovation computers at the time, I don't know what year you're referring to. Perhaps was it the early 2000s or?
No, much earlier. So we, first of all, I was personally working with computers as a student in '87, but the studio didn't have that. So the first few years we worked by hand. But early '90s, we're talking 1991, maybe '92. We had our first Apple Macs and our 3D modeling. We did it first 3D modeling only, not the drawings.
Right.
And then we went to Columbia University in '93, where we had a mixed studio. We had worked with hand, and they're starting to establish the paperless studio. That happened next year fully, but so people were slightly more advanced with their computation, so they worked on the computer, and this was very productive. So when we came back, I think in '94 or something, we upgraded our computation. '95, in fact. So we had been modeling 3D modeling for sketches, but no drawings. So then I started doing the drawings. I think it was '95 or so, and that was another leap of productivity. I could do all the plans by myself as different layers, different levels, and easier coordinated rather than having, literally 10 people drafting and with less flexibility. So this was a leap of productivity. We bought some computers for drawing. So we had both drawings and digital. I mean, the renderings were not so great. I mean, it was good to generate perspective and understand what's going on. Even small little animations you could start to do. But rendering out, we then translated some of this into painting still, and
Oh,
mixing
wow.
3D sketches, 3D paintings. And then only at the end of the '90s, with 3ds Max, we had visualizations not photorealistic like we done later, but when we did Maxi and also the Fano Science Center, less so Cincinnati, but also these 3 projects were our breakthrough projects, where the more detailed 3D modeling and rendering, still augmented by paintings, by the way, it was kind of a breakthrough because we could take the scare factor out and show more a completely resolved geometry. We also had toned down the geometry. So a few years, let's say '96, '97, '98, we've gone quite, we just were pushing for our own satisfaction, very fluid and complex forms, landscape-like forms, and lost all of those competitions. So then we shifted gear and toned down to some extent, rationalizing the geometry more, and that delivered these 3 wins. And then later in the early 2000s, also particularly when the Dubai thing kind of took off, 2006, 7, whatever, we had worked ourselves back to that hyperfluidity, which we've not succeeded with in the late '90s, but this was by then 7 years later, with projects like the Dubai Opera House or the Saadiyat Island. I mean, these weren't built, but these were competition wins, extremely fluid, as well as something like the Dongdaemun Plaza in Korea. So we went back to the architecture we wanted to do in the second half of the '90s. We managed to do them kind of 10 years later. So, and win and build like the Guangzhou Opera House, etc.
So you, when you say the Dubai thing, what
Mm.
did you mean by that? The
This
projects
this
going on here, you mean?
crazy boom
Oh, the boom.
leading
Okay.
up to
Yeah, yeah.
2008. Now, I mean, this turned out to be partly illusory and over the top and not fulfilled, part of a huge global bubble. But for us, it was incredibly important because but this wasn't only Dubai. Dubai, Abu Dhabi was one thing, Qatar as well, but then also all of Europe in boom territory, with the kind of expansion of the EU all around Spain. In every city we had projects. So that was a huge boom period, and we've mushroomed the firm from, at that time, let's say 2004, we were maybe 40 people. 2007, we were 400 people. So we kind of tenfold mushroomed, because these competitions, even if the projects didn't happen, and also early work through stages, were quite well paid. And projects kept flying in left, right, and center. We were winning competition. We were hiring whole studios. Like at one point, I was hired all 40 students of AADRL
Oh, wow.
in
Amazing.
one go, put them into a room, and said they pay for themselves once they win the competition. We only pay them at the end of the month. And so it happened. The BMW project in Leipzig was one like that, for instance. So that was an amazing period. Dubai was fantastic. Then came the meltdown. But we didn't lose people, because the next wave was North Africa. Somehow the same investors maybe shifted there. Anyway, it was literally the whole North African coast,
Yeah.
from Syria to Jordan to Lebanon to Egypt, onto Libya, onto Algeria, onto Morocco. We only leaped over Tunisia. Otherwise, we had every single country, major projects. Unfortunately, that went up in flames in the Arab Spring. All of it stopped except the Rabat theater, which
Yeah.
survived and arrived
Yeah.
now finally.
Mm.
But was more or less started there. So, but we had a wonderful set of projects. So happened. Unfortunately, that's when the first time we had to cut back on
Right.
people. Anyway, so yeah, but we recovered, and then we
Yeah.
discovered, China. China was then the huge wave for us for the next 10 years, and a wonderful story with many, many great projects.
It's interesting you talk about waves, and I can see a wave behind you,
Yes.
So thanks for that kind of overview, because I know that Zaha Hadid Architects is a global player, but it's just nice to hear about the specific projects and the history behind it. Where I come from is studying luxury, and mostly that's in fashion or jewelry or perfumery. Um, it would be very interesting to know how you sort of transcend the meaning of opulence or luxury into architecture or into a space.
Yes. So actually, Zaha her notion was space itself is the greatest luxury. If you can make a bigger space, or if you make an open space, in particular, if you make public spaces, where it's a gift to everybody to enjoy and get excited about and use, etc. So that's the luxury public space, and I think that's very much true. And it came home to me most viscerally. I mean, of course, we have some wonderful public spaces in all the major cities, and it's a joy even to look at buildings from the outside. And then you can also, go in a museum, a public space, or experience a wonderful event like an opera or something. But also, I've experienced it personally, what it means in Isfahan, for instance, an investment which was done maybe 1,000 years ago into fantastic public gardens and public framing artifacts and religious buildings and palaces, etc., and public arcades, that kind of luxury, and hundreds of years later, it still is uplifting for people kind of using these places and gardens and squares. They're coming from their very kind of, let's say, poor background areas and congregate there with their families and have a nice, beautiful picnic in these elegant settings. And I thought, wow, yes, that's investment. Even though when they did this investment, people were poor, and then might have said, you know, that takes away. But if it has kind of hundreds and hundreds of years of lifting up, this is the money very well spent. And that's when we feel sometimes to do great public buildings, and there's this relative high cost attached to this. If you think about long term and we think about this sense of luxury for everybody who wishes to enjoy it, that's very rewarding and worth every penny, because otherwise you might, all of this resources will just be consumed and nothing left behind. And so I believe in investment, not only consumption and luxury. If that's what Zaha focused on. But of course, we also we love to be surrounded by beautiful homes and furnishings and works of art, if you like. Or so that's, of course, we all aspire to that. So the next luxury public spaces is wonderful, but it's also, if we can make our home a bit more elegant and comforting, we can invite people and have lovely events and communications at home. That's a major piece of luxury, which nearly the only thing you would want to, which keeps motivating you to earn more if you have already some. And it's not about, you can't eat 5 steaks per day. Having more than 3 cars is, the diminishing returns. It will not be worth your while, but you always have an aspiration to build out your home more or upgrade your home. So so architecture is at the core of luxury and of the good life, of raising standards of living. And that's why I feel it's so tragic that oftentimes there's so much interference with the creation of architecture through planning restrictions and NIMBYism, maybe envy, I don't know. And that's a real pity. So, but of course, Zaha was also enjoying, the luxury of beautiful jewelry, but more self-designed. It wasn't about the size of diamonds, and she had a fantastic wardrobe. She enjoyed fashion, and fashion had a good relationship with major fashion designers. She was collecting these dresses and loved to wear them at events, etc., etc. So that was one of her most kind of cherished pleasures, and her wardrobe kept growing over the years as fantastic pieces. And also, there were some designers who just created pieces for her just for particular events, like Prada. She created some great dresses for her, for instance.
Did she design her jewelry? Did she actually
She
sell it
designed
somewhere, or
jewelry.
is
She
it
also
just...
designed some of her own outfits.
Oh,
So she had a tailor and created some of her own dresses. Then I got
nice.
into it as well, so I created some suits for myself. And then we also did, kind of this Odlo sportwear series. We did some bathing suits. We did some
Oh, wow.
shoes, various shoes collaborations. So I believe fashion design is, we're all colleagues, whether we are fashion designers, industrial designers, furniture designers, interior, architecture, urbanism. It's all kind of even graphic design and interaction design, or let's say website design. That's all one discipline, one discourse. And we feel very at home and comfortable designing. Of course, to do a fashion label is another thing because of the pace you have to drive a new collection once or twice or three times a year. So that's not something we can keep up with. But to have ideas about fashion and realize some of those ideas, that both myself and Zaha, we've done that.
Have you considered as a brand, as a Zaha Hadid brand, to diversify into something else? Because I'm seeing trends of, for example, luxury hotels diversifying or fashion labels diversifying.
Yes, I mean, we've done also collaborations with fashion designers, and we've done things with Louis Vuitton. We've done things with other brands, with as I said, various shoes, whether it's Lacoste or United Nude. The whole brand, a whole label, Zaha Hadid Fashion or something like this. I would love to do it. We would have to find an entrepreneur, a young kind of hungry, super talented entrepreneurial fashion designer who would like that, sees the kind of potential of our language of architecture. I mean, and this definitely parametricism and tectonism, what I'm talking about now, is definitely something which should and could have a life in fashion. And actually, I find fashion a little bit kind of constrained and too much thinking about retro styles and fast cycles instead of progressing something which fits sociologically and technologically the contemporary era better. So I have a lot of ideas about this. So if I would definitely be. That's why we started this collaboration with Odlo as a very high-tech sports firm, because they had very sophisticated products where they do, computationally varied fabrics with various degrees of absorptions, differential stiffness, cooling fibers. So it's moisture management, movement management, and to do kind of highly sophisticated products, which then also look different. They look more organic because they're much more sophisticated in the way they adapt. There's perforations where you need them. There's thicker fabric absorbing some sweat, for instance, in other places, supporting through stiff fabrics in one direction and being loose and elastic in other. So I'm only wearing, by the way, stretchy materials because I want to go to a dinner party, look elegant, but also I might want to jog home in the same suit. Yeah, that came through. I mean, so that doesn't happen. I mean, in fashion. So I would see fashion as needs us, but I have so many projects. So maybe somebody's listening and say, "Wow, yeah, I want to be part of that." Come on, and we talk about it. Maybe we can launch something.
Yeah, you never know.
Because I'm also personally, I'm very much driving our idea of the metaverse, which is a new frontier for architects, taking
Oh,
over the
tell me about
internet.
that, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the metaverse will happen, no doubt. It will take over large parts of the internet and also substitute large parts of the built environment or be congenial to that. So it will be a huge thing which we launched a metaverse called Metotopia. It's a creative industry hub for the design ecosystem. So we have lots of architects and designers, industrial designers, fashion designers, biennales and schools of design gathering and exhibiting and conferencing in there. And it's at the moment mostly in one building, but spreading out. This will be a whole kind of virtual fashion and design and architecture district. So that's very much architecture, because the purposes which we're pursuing there are very similar to the purposes we're now pursuing in physical venues, whether it's a great conference, a great exhibition, these kind of public communication spaces for the knowledge economy, work environments, collaborative environments. All of that can happen virtually or in synergy with virtual. So we should design both the physical premises and the virtual premises and their connection for clients. That's the agenda, but we also have that virtual only or virtual primary Metrotopia, which we've just incorporated. We're looking for actually investors, but it's already up and running, and we have already many clients using it, etc.
So, I mean, we sort of explored various elements of what you do on a daily basis, but I'm also curious to know about sustainability. Where does that fit in?
Well, it fits in very well, particularly when it comes to passive systems, energy saving and regional climatic adaptation of the architecture. So in the modernism, there wasn't a topic you could spread certain stereotypical. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, once you had air conditioning, you spread something generic around the world, and insulate yourself from the conditions. So now we're much more conscious, actually a bit like the vernaculars, and we're learning from the vernaculars of this world. These had to be much more adaptive and generate degrees of comfort without having a huge energy source and air conditioning power. Even the early modernists had much more sensitivity when they spread around the world with, thermal mass deep kind of shading devices, brise-soleil conditions. They didn't have insulation so much yet for the cold areas, so I'm looking at that, and under the heading of tectonism, that's one of the themes. We do use engineering optimization on the structural engineering, also fabrication processes, but also environmental engineering. So that's a driver, and which enriches the vocabulary, makes buildings more characterful. So I'm looking at it from a designer's perspective, not from the engineer's perspective. So we want to see what the architect can contribute with laying out the morphologies, the massing, but also the facade, the depth of the facade, the brise-soleil, the shading, ventilation conditions, etc. To minimize the machines. Machines also are costly and take up a lot of space inside the building. They get in the way. So if you can minimize that, that's great. But also if you can minimize energy consumption, that's beneficial for the whole life cycle costs of the building. So these are my topics. And we have some great flagship projects like the Central Bank of Iraq or our oil and energy research center in Saudi Arabia, where you can see that the morphology, the whole look and feel and fabric of the building is designed relative to climatic, let's say, conditions and parameters. So that's my sustainability story. Yeah.
Yes. And does AI come into actually helping you with creating or including more sustainable,
Not yet, of course, not
practices?
AIs as such. Eventually, yes, of course. But we have other algorithms of testing out sun exposure, self-shading of various composed masses, fluid dynamics for airflows. That's harder. AI will come in to shortcut some of these. The recent kind of flourish of AI in architecture is more image-based, but we are training up models to make these image creations also, for instance, to learn structural integrity, to learn about shading differentiation. So we're teaching tectonism to AI at the moment, because currently, if you don't have a specially trained up system, they won't get any of that right, because there aren't enough examples
Mm.
in the
Yes.
sample sets to do that. So we're generating our own repertoire or feeding our own kind of good examples and generate new examples to train up. Then it's also for sustainability. But in general, we have a very much invested in an AI research team to increase our productivity, but also increase our creativity, because there's a creativity boost coming through AI, which is quite thrilling and helps us to think and ideate early on with more options, more versions, a kind of good, kind of creative friend to interact with.
I think we've talked about leadership, sustainability, technology, educating the youth, and kind of transferring knowledge, cultivating creativity in an organization. We just kind of scratched the surface, but I would like to thank you very much for your time today and for these insights that you shared with us.
It's been my pleasure. Very nice to meet you.
And I hope one of the listeners might be your future fashion designer.
I would hope so. You definitely have a lot of ideas, but I mean, it's just a big step to do that properly. I mean, of course, I have my parametric dinner jacket, which I'm going to sport probably later this week at the dinner party. But it would be fantastic to do a full-on tectonism, or truly 21st century fashion series. I think we could succeed.
Great. Thank you very much,
All right.
Patrick, and
My
all the
pleasure.
best to you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye now.